So, I find that to be the factor, a huge case, and then also living in a small town community. When we think of social interactions now, we think of hanging out with our friends,
Yeah.
our peers. But in reality, social interaction in a typical context is interacting with a wide variety of people in your community, right? The old lady that lives down the street, the person that you get your groceries from, the butcher, right? Every single person. And you really can't get that in the US anymore, in my opinion. You probably could in some small towns.
Yeah.
I've only found that in like small beach towns.
Yeah, small beach towns, maybe some small rural towns. Yeah, definitely some small rural towns. Like I'm thinking of a couple people I know in Georgia and in Texas where they live in like a stoplight town, and they know the butcher, they know the farmer, they know the gas station tenant and all that stuff. So yeah, I think that's awesome. Have you noticed? Because I mean, you speak Spanish a little bit as well.
I'm fluent, yeah.
Yeah. So when you go down to Mexico and wherever else that speaks Spanish, I mean, I would assume it's much easier for you to do that and like build a relationship with these people that you're going to these small towns with. Is that the case?
It's everything.
Yeah.
That is how you inundate yourself with the culture, is to learn the language. Because language is culture.
Yeah.
It changes the way that you express yourself. Like, you think differently when you're speaking a different language. And also, my grandpa was an immigrant. He came from Iran, and he was always very astute. He's like, if you live in a country, you must take up their language, you must take up their culture, and you must take up their values, right? That is your obligation if you're going to live in there. So I'm very, very particular about that. I hated living in Mexico, and there were all these gringos that spoke no Spanish. They had no adoption of the Mexican culture. Meanwhile, that's the purpose of travel. That's the purpose of being a nomad, is to embrace these cultures. So I just get such a bad taste in my mouth with this digital nomad movement.
Yeah.
People go to Bali and they won't talk to a single Indonesian, right? You go to Mexico and you live in Mexico City and you just live in this bubble. And I think it's atrocious. And I think that people are warranted to hate that movement. But I guess, you want to integrate. Like, integration is where the real magic happens.
How have you balanced that? Because we were talking a little bit about like you coming back to the States, living with your boys at Tropical Animalism HQ. How do you balance like the desire to go do that sort of exploration, nomadic side of life with the integration that you're talking about with your friends back here, if that makes sense?
Yeah. There's seasons for everything, right? So I'm doing a season here in the States, but I'm going back in a month.
Yeah.
In a month and a half. So, I think it's really just about always reassessing your priorities and objectives, understanding that there's seasons. A lot of people, they have such recency bias that they think the thing that I'm doing now is going to be the thing I'm doing for the rest of my life. That is never the case. If I'm doing everything that I'm doing right now, 6 months from now, let alone 5 years from now, like, I've failed miserably. So, I think just realizing that it's a season thing and making sure that I'm always prioritizing the ability to be mobile. Prioritizing mobility, the fact that I can tomorrow move anywhere I want in the world and not have a lot of negative impacts, right? So it takes some sacrifices. Like, I can't get a dog. I really want a dog, but I can't get a dog because of that for the time being. Yeah. But I also know that my desires are going to change as I get older, right? When I'm in my 30s, I want to have a family and I want to have kids, and that's going to require making some roots. And I still am going to be able to live that half and half lifestyle. A lot of people see my content and they're like, yeah, this is great. Just wait until you have a wife and kids. But it's like, the lifestyle that I'm living, my friends have a wife and kids, and they're doing that just as well as I am, if not better.
Yeah.
So a lot of it's like, it's cope.
Yeah.
A lot of it's cope.
How do you think, because obviously there's like a temperamental spectrum, I guess, and like hunters on one side, you could say a farmer, or like the opposite of you, like a person that's not your temperament. I don't know what you would call it. Would that be called a farmer in relation to that?
Yeah,
analogy?
farmer, linear.
What do you like to those people? Are there people, do you think, that like actually are better suited in that environment where they're like, hey, I need X, Y, and Z to be the same for the rest of my time?
Yep, 100%.
Yeah.
And that's completely okay.
Yeah.
Right? But that's also what is pushed on us anyway. So it's just important that we vocalize this other side, right? Because there's a lot of people that aren't like that, but they feel like they have to be.
Yeah.
And they do so much better if they got out of their hometown. There's some people that are happy in their hometown, and that's completely fine. That's good, right? And that's admirable, and that's accurate too. Like, you're supposed to stay close to family, and I'm still close to family too. But there's some people that aren't. So to each their own. You just really need to be self-aware and understand which one you are, and you do that by experimenting.
Yeah.
If you've been living in your same town for the last 27 years, go out for a little bit. It's going to be there when you get back, right? If you've been traveling everywhere for the last 4 years, go stay somewhere for 6 months or a year and see what happens.
Yeah, that's an interesting point, because I mean, it's sort of like the recency bias that you're talking about. I feel like that will stop a lot of people because they're like, oh, there's so many things here that I like. What if I end up like liking that lifestyle and then not wanting to come back, and those things be those connections or ties will be severed, if that makes sense.
Hmm.
But kind of the same point. It's like you will change as a human being regardless.
And distance makes the heart grow fonder.
That's
There
so
are
true.
so
Yeah.
many things that you are taking for granted right now that if you were to deprive yourself of them for a little bit, would mean so much more to you. And you realize it, like I especially realize it now with family. Like, you know, as I'm 26 now, and as I'm kind of maturing and developing, like I feel a really strong responsibility to kind of lead my family. Parents getting older, I'm the oldest of my siblings, so taking care of them as well. That's really, really important. But I was not able to get that until I moved to a different country and didn't really have much interaction with my family for a little bit, because you need to make that space to change. You have to realize that you are the way that you are because there are external stimuli that are tying you to that person, right? You probably notice it when you go and you hang out with your college friends that you get this pull back to being who you were back then. So you need to make that distance so you can change without those distractions and without that pull coming back of you being the old person you were. So, you know, I did that with my college friends. I completely removed myself, and it was in isolation because I had to reinvent myself. And now I can go back with confidence and security in who I am.